Hey everyone, welcome to episode 11 of Open Books with Alana and Erin, two female leaders modernizing the accounting space.
Yeah.
Episode 11.
Yay.
It's very exciting.
It is. It's a good one.
We're past number 10, which I
Yes.
think was like the big one, the big
Yeah.
number for me. So
Yep.
into 11, I feel like we've got a good thing going.
For sure. Yes.
Hopefully we'll continue with this one.
Yeah.
Today we're going to be talking about the specific, unique characteristics that make women great servant leaders.
Yes. Yeah.
We're going to try to lean into that a little bit, talk about how women succeed in a maybe not so collaborative space.
Mhm.
But first of all, let's hop into what you think
Yeah.
the unique traits of women are that specifically lend themselves to servant leadership.
Yeah. I love this question because I think as women, we really have to lean into those traits that make us specifically feminine because I think it just brings so much power in the workplace and in our personal life as well. So for me, I really see one of the biggest strengths for females is that intuition. And so often it's brought up with like a mother's intuition. But for me, I think all females just have this really deep sense of knowing what connects with themselves and knowing how somebody else or gauging how somebody else might be going through their own journey. And I think, while you have to stay clear of trying to mind read or put your perception on someone else or put some like should thinking on yourself of, well, I should be feeling this way. If you're really just letting the intuition be what it is, I think it's very powerful for women. Like I said, knowing when something connects with them and then providing a lot of empathy for somebody else when they're going through something. So
Yeah.
that intuition is like the ticket.
Yeah.
Listening to your gut feeling is wild if you think about it.
Definitely.
What about you?
Well, you mentioned it already, and
Yeah.
I debated between two.
Okay.
So empathy is another big one. You
Yeah.
mentioned it. That ability to look at someone's situation and empathize with that, understand where they're coming from, the context around it. And then my other one was just collaboration.
Yeah.
And really, as I was kind of debating the two in my head, I'm like, well, the more empathetic you are, the better your collaboration is going to be.
Yeah.
And then that collaboration alone is going to give you more perspectives, so your empathy is going to be higher. So they kind of like just build on each other.
Yep.
And so I debated between the two. In the end, I think both of them are
For
the
sure.
greatest
They
strength.
both win.
Yeah, because they really are connected and connected to your intuition as well, because you are like trying to intuit everyone that you're working with and making sure that you're all kind of on the same page and using that to find some of that context that you can build on and collaborate.
It's a powerful thing, that's
Definitely
for sure.
is. Yeah. And the more we collaborate, the more different personalities we're introduced to, just more in general.
Yep.
People coming from different religions, different races, different living scenarios, different parts of the country, outside of the country. Like, it gives you so much knowledge. And I think women have a very strong ability to make that connection with a person and understand the context of their lives.
Yep, I totally agree.
Now we've kind of identified those strengths.
Yep.
Why do you think that some women shy away from leaning into those strengths in the business world?
Yeah. So I've from time to time thought about this, like why, we don't always bring our real selves into work, and why, like, as women, we're not bringing these traits that we talk about that are so incredible and really give us some powerful tools to rely on. Why don't we bring that into the everyday work situation? And I kind of see it as a combination of a couple things. I think first, it can be viewed as unnecessary or often labeled dramatic. And so when we're bringing, our intuition or desire to collaborate, we're very empathetic to other people, I think it can sometimes be seen as like, well, why? It's just work. Like, come to work, do your job, and leave. Like, we don't need to overthink it. We don't need to give it, more thought than it needs, is how some of the perceptions might be, where, we decide, okay, well, it is, we're just bringing drama, we're bringing emotions into the place, into a space where it doesn't need to be. And I just think that's wrong, right? Because it's not dramatic. I think that's a very quick term to use, to try to not deal with something. The other side of that, I think, why women don't lean on these traits, is when you come into work, there's a level of wanting to assimilate to others. And so if you're seeing very, not detached, but just non-emotion in the workplace, I think if you're brought up in that, then it's like, okay, I've got to check this at the door. And it is unnecessary, and I don't want to be dramatic in the meeting. So you just try to push those away instead of being your full authentic self at work. You really try to stifle that. What about you? What do you see?
Pretty similar. Like people seeing that empathy and the intuition as dramatic. I was also very much, maybe not taught specifically, but very much viewed emotions as weak.
Sure.
And I feel like coming into the accounting industry, weakness is not appreciated. And the weak get washed out. So I know when I was coming into the industry, it was very much like we come in, we do our job, we get our numbers right, and it's gone. But I think that does a disservice to not only the employees, but also our clients. Our clients are human beings. They're people. We should be empathetic to them. We should be trying to work with them. Like, this is a human occupation. No matter how much people try to bring AI in, which it can be beneficial. It's a good assistant.
For sure.
But it doesn't have the ability to be empathetic or collaborate. And I feel like that's when accountants, we do our best work when we're collaborating with our team or our clients and their team. But I do think that at least 12 years ago, when I entered the industry, was very viewed as weak. And you didn't want to be weak. Also, being a woman and coming up in the space, there is still a male view of business that is fairly dominant, I would say, which is fairly competitive. And if you show weakness in a competition, others will take advantage of that. So I was very hesitant to do anything. Like, I was going to stay by the book, get my numbers right, and that's it. And slowly learned that I could actually be myself, and that was okay. But yeah, I feel for me, it's the perception of weakness that really stuck with me and made me turn away from any of my feminine strengths, I guess is the best way to say it.
Totally. Yeah. And what I've seen, you touched on like the client dynamic of leaning on, those strengths. And what I've seen is some of my best client meetings and client interactions are when I provide that empathy for a client. We're working with business owners day in, day out, and they go through some wild times. And I think if you're in a meeting with them and you are straight-faced and, okay, well, let's look at the financials again. Like, it's a very cold meeting. And the client is really looking for, that empathy of like, wow, you did your first $1 million in sales. Like, let's celebrate that. Or like, yes, you are going through a hard time. Let's talk about like what that means. And, I'm sure you're not doing great right now, but providing that empathy, I think, creates some of the strongest relationships with our clients.
And relationships, I think, depends on what your firm wants.
Agreed.
I think in CAS, so client advisory services, client advising services, that's what we want. We
Agreed.
want that connection.
Yep.
So that we can advise our clients in the best way they should move forward and
Yep.
meet their goals. And without any empathy, how
Yep.
are you supposed to actually be successful at that? It just
Yep.
seems very opposite, kind of the very cold,
Yep.
these are the numbers, this is it
Yeah.
kind of mentality.
I agree. And I think it can help, not that you have to put up with a client, being mean or berating, or I
Right.
would hope you don't have to. But I think it can also explain some of the client's behavior.
Mhm.
And so it's like, if somebody's like, that was, this client was really intense just now. And it's like, well, if you take a step back, they have a loan coming due,
Mhm.
and we're talking about cash flow, and we've just told them there's no cash to pay that in 12
Yeah.
weeks. Like, what are we going to do?
Mhm.
And we're trying to problem solve with them. This is the first they're hearing of it. They're feeling emotion.
Yeah.
And if we can just give them a little bit of grace, we're a partner with them.
Mhm.
And as long as, they're still being respectful, yes, we can, empathize with
Right.
why they're coming across that way,
Mhm.
which is a really incredible thing to be able to do that.
Yeah. And when you are having those conversations, if you can take that step back, recognize what's happening in the moment,
Yep.
I think it helps you turn that conversation. Turn it from kind of this panicky, almost negative conversation, like, okay, we know this is happening. What are our next steps?
Yeah.
Because you're able to see, like, all right, this person struggling through this. And that's
Yes.
okay. That's human nature.
Yep.
But if you can do that in the moment, you can turn what could potentially be a pretty negative conversation
Yeah.
into a more hopeful one by
Yeah.
the end.
And also then not putting any like guilt or anxiety on
Right.
yourself. Like, okay, this is not, an interaction that, or a feeling that I placed on the client.
Right.
And now we can like label it for what it is. It's, a pretty intense situation, but not caused by me specifically.
Mhm.
They're not unhappy with the service. We're actually collaborating
Yeah.
and working together. But then you step outside of that anxiety and, become more productive in the conversation because you're able to step aside from feeling any sort of guilt for
Yeah.
that feeling.
That guilt is a hard one.
Yeah, guilt is rough. Yep.
One of the greatest weaknesses, I would say.
Yeah.
of
That's a
women
good
is,
point.
unfortunately, we do take, because we are empathetic, I think
Yes.
it's very easy for us to
Yep.
take on guilt for things that we may not necessarily
Yeah.
have any control over, because we understand where the emotion is coming from.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And probably, you got to straddle that
Yeah.
line quite a bit when you do bring, that intuition, that empathy into the workplace. Be sure that it doesn't skew into guilt and create that anxiety for yourself.
That's actually one of my answers
Yeah?
to our I have to find it. It was the what did you learn from your team?
Oh, sorry, I stole it.
We'll hop right in.
Okay.
What I learned from my team, or a specific team member, was that empathy can be a double-edged sword
Yeah.
because it can make you feel guilty.
Oh, okay.
It was a situation where the conversations weren't going well, and the relationship with the client needed to end.
Okay.
It wasn't positive for anyone. It
Yep.
was just causing more stress on both sides. But we had such empathy and knew where this person was trying to go in their path for their business, and we could see that, and we knew how much work had gone into it at the beginning.
Yeah.
And we, in my opinion, let it go too long.
Okay.
Like, we should have, when we first had the inklings of this isn't going right, we should have held firm.
Yeah.
But we just got our emotions too invested, and in the end they kept on for a couple more months.
Yep.
But at that point, like, the situation was not any better. If anything, it was worse. Where if we had stuck to our original feelings about the situation, it probably would have been better for everyone all around.
Yeah.
So it can be, you can push it too far.
Totally.
So
Yep.
it's important really to listen to like your gut as
Mhm.
well. If it's saying like, hey, I understand where this person's coming from, but maybe we need to think a little more like stone cold, I guess,
Yeah,
about
yeah.
it. Like, listen to that
Yeah.
and think about it, because sometimes we can be too empathetic.
And what I'm hearing is like balancing that empathy with still listening to that intuition
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
and allowing the intuition to be clear,
Yes.
not clouding it with all of the empathy of,
Yes.
of the excuses, probably.
Mhm.
But listening to that intuition as
Yeah.
well is really important.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to answer what you
Yeah.
learned from your team?
And what I've learned is sharing our experiences as women in public accounting and women just, in business, um, opens up the doors to the next generation of women.
Yes.
And, when we started the episode, we talked about we don't bring these always into the workplace, these traits into the workplace, because we don't want to be viewed as
Mhm.
having a weakness or being dramatic. But instead, if we do share those experiences, we're opening the door, but we're also sharing with the males, in our workplace, of how our journeys might differ.
Mhm.
And I think that's eye-opening for everyone on your team and around you, just to be able to see what others are going through
Yeah.
and having their horizons opened as well. Because males go through things as well. They have their
Mhm.
own journey. And so the more we share, I think it's just such a powerful thing.
Yes.
And I'm learning more and more how powerful it can be.
Mhm. I would
Yep.
totally agree with that.
Yep.
It's as we add more men into our very
Yeah.
female dominated space,
Yep.
it has been really fascinating watching the interactions and just we were very specific on the type of man that we would bring into
Yeah.
our space, because we're pretty protective of it. But like, it's been really good.
Yeah.
And we've learned a lot so far. It's only been a couple weeks, so
Yeah.
I'm sure we'll be learning much more. But I think they have also learned
Yeah.
from being in this more collaborative space.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great.
That's really great. So we talked about the traits that women do bring into the workplace, and why they may not. How do we support and empower women to lean on those traits that we bring? Because we can say, well, these are the reasons they hide it, and these are the reasons to bring it in. But how do we actually support team members and then also just women in general to lean on those traits?
I am a pretty big proponent of inviting collaboration. Anytime there is an opportunity for collaboration, I want that. I think, especially in the way that our firm is set up, it's very easy for each person to be on their own little island. And then you're kind of your own echo chamber. You aren't you're getting a little bit of empathy with your clients, but like, you aren't really stretching those muscles.
Sure.
And I think a lot of us, if we're coming from more traditional firms, may have not stretched those muscles at all.
Yeah.
So anytime I can invite collaboration either with a client or with another team member, I want to do that just to get exposure out there. That's probably the thing I do the most, because then also it raises everyone up in the team, and it lets everyone, male or female, recognize the success of that. Like, you don't have to be a competitive business person, accountant person to be successful. We can all be successful as a team.
Yeah.
So I think that's how I'm doing it. I'm still learning the best way, for sure.
Yep.
Because I don't feel like this is something that I'm super strong at. I would love to hear what you do to really raise up those characteristics.
Yeah, and I think, to your point, still learning, still growing, still finding out what works. But for me, I think it's just being open and honest about my experiences and what I'm bringing to the plate. Identifying what strengths I have, and then also, where my weaknesses lie. So I think for me, it is more trying to walk the walk and allow others to do the same. And so not shying away from sharing experiences or speaking up when maybe years ago I would have fallen quiet, or just not leaned into those strengths. I'm really trying to lean into those now with the intent that, you know, others can observe that
Right.
and feel comfortable to do the same, to try and model that behavior,
Right.
you know, that I would want to see, to feel okay doing the same.
Do you currently have any mentors that you look up to that you're kind of following their path? Because I feel like as leaders, it's
Yeah.
hard to be that first person
Yeah.
to start sharing some of that emotion
Yep.
and journey just in meetings or in general.
Yeah.
Do you have another woman that you're able to look up to?
Yeah, I do. I consider myself lucky that I do. And they speak up, and I'm lucky to be in meetings with them and to observe that. I would also say there's other mentors that aren't only female, that I think what's really incredible is they open the door and provide that, like, that feeling of, you might be, you know, opening up the opportunity of, like, how are you as a female navigating this? I think that's really incredible for a male to do. And I'm lucky that I have been able to experience that as well. So it's so important, I think, for women to have other women mentors. But if you don't, you might have a male who is willing to, try and help as well.
Yeah.
I think. Do you have a woman
do.
mentor?
Sarah, of course,
Yeah.
our COO, is pretty. We don't like keep things close to the chest.
Yeah.
But we have a very different culture than a traditional CPA firm.
Yeah.
But even when I was still with the traditional firm, I did have a male mentor who was and still is amazing at leaving that space open and being vulnerable himself.
Yeah.
Which I cannot thank him enough for,
Yeah.
because it literally changed my life.
Yeah.
But I also had women mentors as well who were willing enough to show some of that vulnerability. Maybe if it was just the two of us, but still willing to show that, so that I knew it was okay to lean into the things that aren't necessarily seen as strengths in the business world.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I was curious if who you would list out. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think having that mentor is a really incredible thing, because, like you said, it's one thing to try and pave that path.
Yeah.
But if you can find someone who exhibits some of those strengths and allows room for you to bring your own strengths, I think that's a really incredible thing. If you can find that in your career.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really funny. I find it really funny. As we're talking here, I am remembering back to the very first time that I think I was told that being emotional was not good.
Yeah.
And it was back in like middle school.
Yeah.
And one female friend had said, "Erin, you're like too loud and boisterous and too excited. You need to tone that down."
Oh my gosh.
And I can recognize exactly where I am in the school, who it was, and because we were all going into these two classrooms, and I was being loud and obnoxious, I'm sure, because that's who I was and still am today. And she had said that, and I tried to like temper myself, I guess. But I have not thought about that in ages. Yeah. But just that, like, trying to go back into this little hole that's accepted by the business world. Yeah. It's just not what we should have to do as women.
Totally. And what's so interesting as you talk about that is one of my favorite things when something good happens is to tell you, because your excitement level, like, even if it's a couple days later, I'm like, oh, I'm going to tell Erin, and I'm going to get so excited again, because she gets so freaking excited for me because it's just that excitement level that you have for other people. And so what's interesting is in that situation, told that you were too much.
Yeah.
But that's one of your greatest strengths is like what you feed for other people.
Yeah.
But I think it just goes to show if you lean on that and we lean on, maybe we were told we were too much, but for other people, it's what feeds them.
That is so,
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Who would have thought?
Yeah.
Oh, that makes my heart full.
Good. I'm glad.
I can be excited for you.
Yeah, it's the best thing. If you ever get the chance to tell Erin good news,
I am stoked.
I might just tell her fake things sometimes to make my day better.
I mean, I will still
fake
be
good
just
news. I know
excited.
you will. Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Back on track.
Yep,
Away
totally.
from middle school.
Yes.
Whole other thing. But like kind of talking about back then.
Yeah.
What would you tell yourself earlier in your career about leaning into those specific traits that women have?
Yeah, and so thinking about those specific traits that women have, for me, it's just as females being to be our full authentic selves at work. And so for me, what I would have told myself, I would actually have had myself read a book. And I had to write down the title because it's a very long name. But it's called Great Leaders Live Life Like Drug Addicts, How to Lead Like Your Life Depends on It by Michael Brody Waite. And if you haven't read the book, it's a really incredible book. And it talks about the masks that we wear when we come to work. And we try to assimilate with those around us. We decide from our perspective, this type of person gets ahead or this type of person has more success. And that's what we try to replicate. Whether it speaks to our authentic self or not, that's who we try to become. And instead, if we're brave enough and have the courage to control what we can't control, but also just be our full authentic self at work, we will actually find more success that way. And we will actually be less tired emotionally because we are not fighting what we naturally bring into a situation. And that resonated so much with me because if you are trying to be a different perspective of who you are constantly fighting that. And when we're at work for such a large quantity of time, that is exhausting. And at what point is it just, well, take me as I am. I'm going to find success, but this is my authentic self.
Yeah.
It's an incredible book.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and I wish I would have read that from the beginning of my career because I would have from the beginning tried to bring who I am and strengthened what I have internally as opposed to trying to be something maybe that didn't resonate with me. Yeah, really incredible. Read it. Yeah.
The whole masking thing makes me think of back working retail and the customer service voice.
Sure.
Or the customer service. When you were at the retail place.
Yep.
I worked at a video game store.
Yep.
That customer service persona is a total mask. And you would come home, I would come home and be exhausted because spent all day wearing this. I can't wait to read it. I have immediately added it to my wish list.
Yeah,
so.
I read it in just a couple of days because it totally resonated with with where we're at in our careers and everything.
Can't wait.
Super
to read
interesting.
It.
Yeah. What would you tell yourself back then?
A lot of stuff.
Yeah.
So before I was in the accounting space, I worked at a video game store.
Yeah.
Very male dominated. There were very few other women, young women, people.
Yeah.
It's changed since then, but it was a very competitive environment. Not just like even how each store was managed, it was extremely competitive.
Okay.
So it was always about getting ahead of someone else.
Got it.
And I mean, we're working retail. It's not high stakes. But that was still like the mentality of our store needed to be better than this other store that was 2 blocks down the road. Like super competitive. So when I switched and went to, I worked at a financial institution where it was all women leadership.
Yeah.
I came in with this very competitive, like, okay, I've got to be the best at all of this stuff. it's a competition.
Yeah.
Rather than a more collaborative view. So I would like to go back and tell myself that, like, what you actually want, like, because I was not happy at the video game store
Sure.
other than
Yeah.
getting to play video games. That was great. But like, I was not happy there. I did
Yeah.
not feel like this was something that I wanted to do, because it just was uncomfortable
Yeah.
all the time.
Yeah.
But I wish I could have told myself then, like, this isn't it.
Yeah.
There is stuff out there. Go into your next job with less competitive mindset.
Sure.
Because
Yeah.
it was a good job, but I was not a great fit for that role.
Yeah.
Because I was just not collaborative at all.
Sure. Yeah.
So, and then I came into the accounting industry, and it was like, there's a bit of competition. But I have since learned.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would tell myself, like, not everything's a competition.
Yeah.
You'll get more done if you work
Yes,
collaboratively
yeah.
than if it's just a fight for whoever can do the best.
Yeah. Because that also is very exhausting to
Yeah.
always be in that fight mentality.
Yeah.
And so I think if you instead look at it as like leaving it better than you found it, as far as like opening doors,
Yeah.
I think maybe that's a good perspective.
Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah.
That's what I would
Yeah.
go back, tell my little video game self.
Makes
that,
sense. Yeah.
hey, it's okay to, have emotions.
Totally, it is. It's actually quite powerful.
Yes.
Yep.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Well, thanks everyone for listening to Open Books. We hope that by bringing forward the lessons that we've learned through our many, many years in the accounting industry, that others can learn from us and also share in our journey as we evolve as leaders in the accounting space. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.